everyone. Okay, so lots of videos for the Nearpod today on the Vikings. We've got a few videos to watch in class. So the very first thing that's linked in the Nearpod is the big long list of little short videos about the Vikings in Ireland made by the National Museum of Ireland. So we will watch one of these either on the axe or on the sword in class. You'll vote. Hands up who wants the Viking axe, hands up who wants the Viking sword. So whatever one we don't end up watching in class, watch the other one now, because the Viking axe and the Viking sword are both integral artifacts to what makes the Vikings, well, so feared and, so extensively studied today. So that's the first thing to do in Nearpod, is just fill in the blanks we didn't get time to cover in class. And then the focus of my video, and actually really all the stuff on Nearpod today, one of the focuses is artifacts, what the material culture of the Vikings tell us. And that's because we get oftentimes the best picture of daily life from the Middle Ages as a whole from artifacts. People in the Middle Ages, now literacy is increasing. And we talked last week about how that's connected to the monasteries and things like the Carolingian Renaissance. But so literacy is increasing, but still the tools of literacy are still pretty unachievable for ordinary people. And that kind of also means that there's a bias in terms of like what is written down. So things that are written down tend to be religious in nature or other things that people in the Middle Ages found really important to preserve. So that means that they don't find their daily lives very important for them to write down and preserve, even though us historians would love them to have done that. So that's when archaeology gets really useful, is oftentimes it can tell us more than the written record can. So you're actually going to watch the last thing in the Nearpod, well, the second to last thing, the last video in the Nearpod today is a video from the British Museum. And it's very new. It came out in 2020, and it's because they have a big Viking exhibition on, but then COVID, nobody could see it. So they did this live tour of the exhibition and showed the artifacts. So it ties in well with this artifact theme, but also a lot of the things that we are discussing in class. So it's kind of a really good overview, and I think it'll be useful as well when we get to the Vikings attack Iona game. One of the cool things that the British Museum video does well is it very briefly shows you some toys that belong to Viking children. And they make the point that's very important, that without such toys, we'd know very, very little about childhood in these Middle Ages cultures because, they didn't write down what children were doing every day. So this little video that I've made for you is going to explore some different types of Viking-produced artifacts. Now, first off is something that also is shown towards the end of that British Museum video, and that's the Viking form of writing called runes. So the Vikings Life and Legend exhibition at the British Museum it shows you in that video some of them, but I've also given you a link on a separate slide, which is going to take you through to lots of different images for you to have a quick look at. You don't need to spend very long on that. But it's to show you that runes were often used as inscriptions, as indeed this here slide does as well. And actually, it's a form of writing, and although it's very angular, it is actually adapted from the Latin alphabet, that they adapted it to their own script, their own language. So it's very angular. It consists of simple strokes. And actually, although we tend to associate it with the Vikings, runes were used by Germanic peoples in the north of Europe. And actually, it came about because of their culture contacts with people from the Mediterranean region. And they started to be developed from the 3rd century. So up to the Middle Ages, the runes were commonly used. And so when we see runes being used, it kind of tells us about Viking expansion as well. As I said, it's not really a language that is, they're composing works of literature in. It tends to be preserved as inscriptions, like on this carving here, which is a memorial stone. And then the other pictures you'll see that there's runes on jewelry and other ornaments as well. Another really cool find comes from modern day Scotland, which actually in that time period was part of the Kingdom of Norway. Actually, the northern parts of Scotland and a lot of the islands were part of the Kingdom of Norway until like the 13th century. These guys are called the Lewis chessmen, and they are indeed for playing the game chess. Were probably trade goods, and were being brought from Scandinavia by boat to maybe Scotland or maybe Ireland. They were found hundreds of years later in the sand on a beach. So, you know, they obviously washed up from somewhere, and then the sands preserved them. But they would have been originally a very high status item. But telling us that people back then got bored like we did, you know, they probably would sympathise with our COVID lockdowns. So one of the other links that I've given you is to let you see some more pictures and get a little bit more background information on these Lewis chessmen. And that's on the History of the World in 100 Objects website. There's also a radio documentary there, but if you're really interested in chess, by all means go and watch it. But otherwise, I think look at the pictures, read what it says, and the British Museum actually holds some of them. So that documentary that I've got linked here will also let you see some more pictures of them. But they're really neat. As you can see from the slide here, you know, they're like grasping their face. It's like they're like thinking, oh my God, will you hurry up and make a move? So these were made, we think, you know, oh God, my mind's gone blank now. Anyway, in the High Middle Ages. So that means actually after the period that we call them the Vikings. Viking originally just meant pirate. So increasingly today we recognize in the scholarship that Viking is a job. It's not an ethnicity. Instead, even at the time period, they would have been like, yeah, my job's a Viking, but I am Scandinavian. So a word that we use to describe these peoples instead that is a lot less problematic than Viking is Norse. And you'll have seen that in class when I talk about the Hiberno-Norse and the Anglo-Norse. So the Norse is kind of the more neutral term, but because Viking, as I said, it's a job description. So these are later than this raiding period. These Lewis chessmen comes from a settled, economically booming period, but these artifacts combined remind us something very, very important for all of you to keep in mind, that the Vikings were not just Vikings in terms of their job. They actually are reflective of a very complex society. They're not just horned raiders. They did a lot more than just that. So one of the things that they did do, to veer off artifacts for a minute, was exploration. They even got to North America. And that includes the island of Greenland. So the Viking era in Greenland began really quite early on in the early 10th century when a guy called Gunnbjorn Ulfkrakason, he got blown off course on his way from Norway to Iceland. So as you can see from that picture on the map on the left, he was blown a heck of a way off course. And when he was blown off course, he caught a glimpse of Greenland and was like, huh, so yeah, okay, there's more exploring to be done. It wasn't until 982 that the Vikings tried to settle the island. And this was done by a guy called Eric the Red. And Eric the Red was from Iceland, and he was exiled from Iceland for punishment for the crime of murder. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Vergald in class, and we had that poor guy with the red hot bar of iron. Eric the Red was from a high status background, which was why he wasn't executed for murdering someone. He was just exiled. So it all has to do with your status in the Middle Ages. So Eric the Red decided he was exiled from Iceland. He was going to go here instead. And for anybody who's a marketing or business major, here is a history of your discipline and action, because Eric the Red decided that this would be a great place to colonize. And so he named it Greenland, or Greenland, on the pretext that if he gave it a nice name, a nice attractive name, more people would go with him to settle there. Of course, as everybody knows, there's very little green about Greenland, particularly it's even less green than Iceland. As this picture to the left shows, that big white bit in the middle, that's a giant glacier. So the green bits on this map are like not actually all that green either. It's just that that's not where the giant ice flows are. So Eric the Red, first case of, report him to the Better Business Bureau. So he went to Iceland and organised settlements. He organised settlements on the extreme southwest coast of Greenland and on the extreme southeast coast. So that's what's marked on the map on the right as the western settlement and the eastern settlement. Now, although he tried his best through some fake marketing, the community that settled on Greenland was probably very small. They did try to farm, but were largely unsuccessful about that. And so it seems to be that they relied on trade, particularly walrus ivory. Because there's lots of walruses and they have great big tusks. And so what they would do is kill the walruses and export the ivory tusks to Europe, where then they would be in demand for high status goods. We do know that there were enough people, though, for them to need a bishop of the church. So there was a bishopric founded at a place called Gardar, and actually the ruins of the church are still visible. That's on the picture there on the right. That is one of the churches, medieval churches from Greenland. As you can see, there is some green on Greenland, but I wouldn't fancy growing any crops there. I think animal grazing might be the best you would do, really. Lots of rocks, and obviously in the background of that picture, some lovely icebergs. So there are some churches, the bishopric, and there were even 2 convents for nuns. Oh, sorry, I've hit the wrong button there. There are even 2 convents for nuns, and altogether 12 churches. One of the great mysteries of the Middle Ages is what was the fate of Greenland. We know that by the 14th century, the settlement was in decline. The colony on the western side of the island, so the western settlement there on that map, we know that that was abandoned around the year 1350. By the early 15th century, there's only very occasional references to the colony, and indeed the Pope writes that he's really worried about the Greenlanders because they were Christians, but he's kind of concerned that they might have fallen into paganism. Okay, so you're going to watch a few minutes of a documentary that is linked in the Nearpod. Take a note of the times here, just in case it doesn't start and end in the right place. It's on YouTube, so you want to watch from 16 minutes, 20 seconds to 21 minutes and 50 seconds. And this is going to discuss some of the evidence that we've got for what happened to these Greenlanders. They just disappeared. Why? What was going on? So you need to watch that video for you to be able to answer the quiz that comes after it. That video is also really good for reminding us that it's not just the written record and artifacts that we can use to get back into the Middle Ages, but you can see some really cool ways that they've used science in that documentary. You know, they're talking about flies, and if you go too far in that documentary, you're going to learn about ice cores. So, you know, really, we know the most about the past when all the different disciplines work together to uncover as much as possible. So that's what you're going to do next, and then you're going to watch that, like, you know, 6 or so minutes, answer the quiz, and then you're going to settle yourself in for a pretty interesting documentary about the British Museum exhibit on the Vikings. Lots of cool stuff for them to show you. And then you're going to have an activity based on everything you've learned from the Nearpod this week, but particularly that British Museum live documentary thing is going to be the most useful for you.